everyone. Welcome into another episode of the Guilty as Charged podcast. Here on the Guilty as Charged podcast YouTube channel, we are here for a Saturday Q&A. I am riding solo. First, it was Steven was out. Then it was Tyler was out, who was sick this morning, who then asked me to fill in. So that is where we are now. I thought I would effectively join the show and talk about where Herbert's injury stands right now. And then after that, take some of your guys' questions from the comment section. First, shout out to Lou Sheepers for the super chat. So if you want to make sure that your question gets answered, then you can send in a super chat as always. But let's talk about first where we stand on Herbert injury watch. Obviously, Herbert did not practice yesterday. He was extremely limited in practice on Thursday, in the words of Ian Rappaport. He had a high ankle sprain against the Panthers. What does that mean? Well, if you watch the tape, DJ Johnson, the Panthers edge rusher who was going after Herbert, essentially when he was putting his body weight on his ankle, trying to bring him down, that means Herbert's ankle went into a everted position, which means it went outwards while his foot was, still in the same direction. So basically he bad way of phrasing that. He stretched the ligament at the very least, the lateral ligament that is in his ankle. So that is kind of the most that we know at this point. I can't tell you how much swelling there is, how much bruising there is, but generally when we are talking about high ankle sprains, there is more swelling and bruising relative to low ankle sprains. So you can associate low ankle sprains as essentially your ankle going inwards versus your ankle going outwards, which is what happened to Herbert on Sunday when he tried to extend that play against the Panthers. And I got some questions about, why was Herbert able to finish this game against the Panthers, but now he's having these issues as he's preparing to play the Pittsburgh Steelers and, is in all this pain. But basically, all of the adrenaline that was in his system on Sunday quickly left his system as he now has started this recovery and probably woke up Monday morning not feeling particularly well. So that is where we truly stand on Herbert injury front. Supposedly, Harbaugh and Herbert are both, on the same page. He's doing everything he can to play tomorrow is the messaging. I have a belief, if you made me make a bet and put a gun to my head, that I ultimately do think Herbert will play tomorrow, maybe 60-40 odds if you wanted me to put some money on that. But, I think it is up in the air. And I think the fact that the Chargers are 2-0 heading into this game is something, to consider for the team, especially with the Chiefs at home next week and then a bye. Do you want to buy him this week, with the 2-0 cushion that you kind of created if they test him out in pregame warmups on Sunday and, he's not looking good, right? Because this is not just a pain movement, but this is also not just pain, I should say, that he's dealing with, but how much will he actually be able to move against TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and Keanu Benton and Alex Highsmith, right? So this is the test of playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Chargers' offensive line has been up and down throughout the year. So in addition to this being a pain quotient question and, tape, fill him up with drugs, call him Justin Herbert. This is also a movement question. So that is kind of what we're looking for going into this game and what the Chargers will ultimately be looking for pregame, assuming they work out Justin Herbert heading into this one. So that's sort of where we stand on the Herbert injury. I don't think that it is necessarily an impossibility he plays tomorrow. I think it's actually quite likely, but how much he'll be able to move, I think, is a big question. And 1 week after a high ankle sprain generally is not enough time. Daniel Popper of The Athletic asked Justin Herbert yesterday what grade his ankle sprain was, and I wanted to give a little bit of a breakdown into what that means. So if you have a grade 1 ankle sprain, particularly for a high ankle sprain, it means that your lateral ligament is stretched. If you have a grade 2 ankle sprain, it means that that ligament is partially torn. If you have a grade 3, then that means the ligament itself, the lateral in your ankle, fully torn. Based on what Ian Rappaport reported, which is that MRIs and X-rays all came back incredibly clean. As far as we know, there's no structural damage to this thing, and it is mostly just swelling, pain, movement issues like I described. I do think that it is a grade 1. I would be surprised if he was playing tomorrow on a grade 2 or grade 3 ankle sprain. If it was grade 3, there would be no way that he was playing. So that is kind of where we stand. And there was a funny moment between Popper and Herbert yesterday where Popper asked for the grade of the ankle sprain and Herbert responded A+ and essentially played stupid. Not that he was ever going to answer that question, nor should he, from the purposes of the Chargers medical staff and, keeping everything in house. No chance that that was ever going to be answered in a legit way. But that is, I think we are dealing with a grade 1 ankle sprain. And, people were kind of replying to me on Twitter yesterday, right? You obviously have the example of Mahomes in the postseason, in which Mahomes, gets hurt right before halftime of the Jaguars game a couple of years ago, or versus the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Similar thing happened. And they just put him in at halftime, filled him up with whatever he needed to get back out there, but that's also a different environment. Right. I'm not saying Herbert can also do the same thing, but do or die playoff game is, midway an ankle sprain happens is a little bit different than week 3. And we're trying to figure out what to do and whether we rest him, because you want to have Herbert for the rest of the season as well. And so that is something to consider if his mobility and his movement and the pain are, subpar as we enter Sunday when they're working him out. So that is something that I think is worth mentioning. Obviously, you don't want to throw a game away, but if he really can't go tomorrow, he can't go tomorrow. I do ultimately think he'll try to play with the tape, like I said. And then my final point on this before we dive into questions, the Chargers obviously traded a 6th-round pick for Taylor Heinicke, to be essentially their backup quarterback in this game. So we're still on Stick Heinicke watch because Stick has been the QB2 in both of these games. Heinicke has started as the emergency 3rd quarterback to start the season. For those who were watching the Panthers game, Stick had his helmet essentially on the sidelines to go in if Herbert could not come back into the Panthers game. Herbert comes running out of the field after he sees Stick, and he comes out of the medical tent, and all is well for the rest of that game. But Stick would have been the backup quarterback. But that being said, I do not think you can look at how Stick played this preseason and how Stick played this preseason, what directly led to them trading for Heinicke. You can't start Stick if Herbert is unable to go. And it's got to be Heinicke. He has, more than a full season of starters experience. I understand that, he's only been here for 3 weeks, but this is the same Chargers team that trusted Elijah Molden to, sub in for Alohi Gilman after he had been here for like 10 days, right? So, I think there's that angle to it too. There is like an implicit trust that they've had in being able to, trust their guys. Maybe there is some way that they could start Heinicke and bring in Stick for some rushing packages. I don't know. That is something that is also, possible going into this game. But at the end of the day, I think you have to start Heinicke in this game. If Herbert can't go, he has played in big games before. He's played for multiple coaches. He's played in multiple systems. And at the end of the day, he has played in NFL games that mattered. And Easton Stick has not played in an NFL game that has mattered. And I think that is a very big deal in terms of, this game, week 3, chance to go 3-0 in the AFC. I'm not saying Heinicke would win the game or gives you a great chance to win or that he wouldn't throw 3 interceptions, but he ultimately gives you a statistically and, just functionally better chance to win than Stick in this game. So that's just kind of where I stand on that. Per Harbaugh, he had said earlier in the week that if Herbert could not go, it would be Easton Stick. And then he changed his tone a little bit yesterday because then he was asked again, who would be the QB2? Would it be Stick if Herbert can't go? And he said, I'm not going to reveal any of my contingencies. And then also, specifically being asked about Heinicke, said that Heinicke has caught up to the playbook, faster than anyone he's seen, right? That was his quote yesterday regarding Taylor Heinicke. And so I think ultimately he gets the start if Justin Herbert can't go. And I think, that will prove to be an asset tomorrow, ultimately, if Herbert cannot go. So I want to get now into some of your guys' questions. Let's see. This one comes from Lou Sheepers, who sent in that super chat. How much would Herbert being out impact efficacy of the run game at the end of the day? I think when you think about it, right, Herbert is a very important part of what they do in the run game, right? And Greg Roman has said as much himself. The ability for defenses to be more in that too high scheme, right, and drop back in coverage because they think Herbert's going to throw. That's a big part of that. But if Herbert's injured, obviously you're going to see defenses, I think, stack the box and test the Chargers run game more. But the other side of that is obviously that the Chargers, what was I going to say? The other side of that is obviously that the Chargers have been very successful in running the game. And this is not a Steelers defense that I think is, necessarily well above league average. I know they're second or third throughout 2 weeks, but I'm not necessarily scared of running on them. What I am concerned about in this game as it relates to if Herbert is either out or is limited and, they have to deal with the Steelers defensive line is the performance of the interior offensive line. They got away with the Panthers, and the Panthers was a situation in which they were going against a defensive line that did not have Derek Brown. This Steelers defensive line is not one to mess around with. They have, as I mentioned earlier, they have Watt, and they have Cam Hayward, and they have Alex Highsmith, Keanu Benton, Montavious Adams, like a lot of guys that they can throw at you in the rotation. And I think it's their biggest test for this Chargers offense ultimately. So that is going to be a big test, I think, particularly for the interior of this Chargers offensive line. Are they able to withstand that pressure? I think this is a bigger test for the Chargers interior line than week 1 was against Crosby and Wilkins, just in terms of the depth that the Chargers have on the offensive line. So if Herbert's out, I do think it negatively impacts the run game. But the one thing that gives me hope, I guess, if Herbert is out or is limited in some capacity, is that J.K. Dobbins has been running the ball at a historic pace. He has been very good himself and has been better than the Chargers run blockers themselves, right? He is creating a lot of rushing opportunities, for himself, EPA wise. He, has high rushing yards over expected stats as well. Are these sustainable through the whole year? No. Is he going to average 9.9 yards per carry throughout the whole year? Probably not. But I do think the one thing that gives you hope in this game, again, if Herbert is limited, if it's Heinicke out there, is that Dobbins can give you one more game of 100 plus yards. He can give you one more game of 5 or 6 yards per carry. And that is something that, the Chargers are going to absolutely need on Sunday if Herbert is ultimately out. So that's kind of my thought there. I do think it disadvantages them in the run game because I do think teams are going to play them tighter. But I also think this was going to be kind of a bring your lunch pail game to work anyway with both of these defensive lines and what they've shown throughout the first 2 weeks of the season. So, the Steelers also have their own problems in terms of their offensive line with Troy Fautanu, who has been ruled out, I assume, for this game based on his injury news. They lost Nate Herbig. They lost Isaac Seumalo. So they're also battered, particularly from the center to the right tackle spots on their offensive line. So that is, sort of where we're at. All right, let's see if anyone else has any questions as we get into this Q&A. Excited to be on with you guys again. As always, make sure you send in a super chat if you think, if you want your question to be 100% answered, but I'll try to get to all of your guys' questions. This one comes from Kevin Kernick. Do you think because they're on the road, not at the Bolt with modern rehab equipment, that he just has to take it easy? If it was more serious, we'd know, right? Scans came back clean. As I said earlier, I think they have modern medical equipment in Carolina. I don't think that is necessarily the issue. He would have to take it easy just because this is a high ankle sprain. And I think even if they were practicing in Los Angeles, that Herbert probably would have had the same routine of limited practice on Wednesday and Thursday and then not practicing on Friday. I think that would have been the same either way. Again, I do not think this injury is serious in terms of holding him out for a long extended time. And again, is it about the pain and the movement quotient here? Luckily, as Kevin said, Ian Rappaport has said that there's no structural damage as far as an MRI or an X-ray going on here. So from that standpoint, the Chargers are in the clear. But the thing with, an ankle sprain in particular, or any sprain in the body, whether that's a foot sprain and whether that's a elbow, whatever we're talking about, knee, is that you can re-aggravate that injury, right? And that's why the Chargers are going to make sure that that foot, if he does play tomorrow, is heavily, heavily, heavily taped up. And, pray, because at that point it will be in God's hands what TJ Watt and Cam Hayward do to this interior. So I think that's kind of where we stand. What I'm saying is the path and what the medical team would be doing would be the same, whether they were in Carolina, whether they were in LA. I do not think it is serious, but a high ankle sprain is a high ankle sprain. And, Steven was talking about it in our group chat, like it is a particularly tough injury. Herbert, superhuman athlete, but he's still going to have to deal with the pain and the swelling of this, which is going to be difficult. So that's, I think, kind of where we're at this point. Forgotten lolcow. What is Palmer's situation? We need offensive weapons on deck in this kind of game. I don't know how much they're going to be throwing to begin with, but yes, it would be helpful to have Palmer out there. So he obviously had been dealing with his knee going through last week. I think it was, I don't know what the official designation is. I think it was his arm or his elbow in particular that was giving him trouble this week. He is questionable for Sunday. He was questionable going into last Sunday. I'd imagine he plays, but, that it could go either way. If he does play, I think the Chargers roll with their 5 receivers with Palmer, McConkey, Quinton, Darius Davis, and Semi Fehoko. That has been their primary, go-to stuff. If he can't play, then I do think that will lead to the activation of Brendan Rice. And that is what they did last week when they were testing whether Palmer could go pregame. That was basically their decision as to whether Brendan Rice would be active or inactive. So I think Palmer gives it a go. How healthy he is, that's another story. He's dealing, again, with the arm, he's dealing with the knee. So I think it's just, kind of been an unfortunate, injuries that have added up for Palmer, unfortunately. Let's see what other questions we have. Scrolling through. Alex, pinch hitting on a Saturday. That is exactly what I'm doing. And I know the Saturday Q&As usually contain a fair degree of college football, memorabilia. It's usually Steven talking about Utah, but we are still talking about red this week, baby, because let me try to get it in frame. I am still taking the Rutgers pants this week. I still do have them, so don't worry. Rutgers is going to beat Vatek today. So big college football Saturday here on the podcast as well. Let's see. Marcus Reichert, how many times do you think Fields will fumble in this game? Fields has actually, through 2 weeks, been one of the 4 or 5 quarterbacks who's committed 0 turnover-worthy plays. So that's the name of the game for the Steelers. Obviously, Fields is not going to beat you deep or even necessarily with this Steelers offensive line situation, going to run for a ton of yards. But what he will do is, play mistake-free football. And for the Steelers, that's all they can really ask for going into this game. So I think that makes a lot of sense for them. I would say fumble-wise, I would be, if you're trying to create a situation where Fields turns over the ball, it's definitely Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack getting up in there. And I think this is a week where they will be on the loose. Joey Bosa supposedly feeling better, I think, than he did last week. Khalil Mack a little bit quiet last game. So I think this could be definitely a big game given the Steelers' offensive line situation. But Fields, so far this season, has actually been pretty smart in terms of how he has been running the show and running that Steelers offense in kind of a game managerial role. NSN, why can't the Chargers have at least one season without high anxiety? Just not what you signed up for. You know what you signed up for. You signed up for constant ankle and thigh and quadriceps and hamstring updates throughout a Chargers season. That's just how it goes. Everyone obviously is not new to the party here. At Nitzer666, do you see Vidal being a factor in the season, especially if Edwards continues to struggle? Let's talk a little bit about Gus Edwards, who is so far, as Nitzer is putting it, struggling on the year. Gus Edwards is one of a couple running backs who is not forced to miss tackle, despite having over 30 carries. He also has not been much of a threat in the red zone in particular, and on all of his carries to this point, he's averaging 2.9 yards per carry. Goes without saying, that's not sustainable in terms of what the Chargers did last game, giving him 18 carries. And I understand, and trust me, Gus is a Rutgers legend. I love him. But you cannot be giving Edwards 15 to 18 carries if he looks like this on tape. And per Jim Harbaugh, he said that earlier this offseason that Edwards had offseason surgery. So, maybe that's just him getting comfortable, but then he also flip-flopped 4 days later and said he didn't. I tend to think, based on what he said at first, that Edwards probably did have some procedure done. And I think you can see it a little bit in how he's playing right now, too. I think Edwards, there's just been a couple plays, particularly in the Panthers game. I noticed it where he doesn't fully trust the hole or the blocking in front of him, and he'll just bounce it outside when he doesn't have to. And that's not traditional Gus Edwards, that, we've come to know from the Ravens. So do I see Vidal becoming a factor? I still think they're going to run Gus till quite a bit in the season, unless they just can't, either injury wise or just statistically the production is just non-viable. I think they run with Gus Edwards and keep Vidal as a healthy scratch unless the situation gets worse. Haskins is obviously there for special teams value, but the only way I see Vidal at this point making major inroads this season is if one of Gus or JK does get injured, and that would be a situation in which you would probably end up playing him. Let's see. Joe Alt will drop the people's elbow on Cam Hayward retaliating for the punching Herbert last time. I actually totally forgot about the Cam Hayward thing last time in the game in 2021. I think it was. Totally forgot about it. And then I remembered it. I'm like, oh yeah, I hate that guy. So we'll see how that goes. In terms of our defense, this comes from ET44A. How confident do you feel? The Steelers have only scored one touchdown so far. I also want to mention that the Steelers' run game isn't that good. It has been, inflated by Fields rushing. Offensively, I guess talking about the Steelers' offense first, the Steelers are not necessarily going to be in a position where they end up running away with this game. I feel pretty confident in the Minter defense in that regard. But I do think, what people have talked about the whole week is that, this is probably going to be a 13-10, 17-14 type final score. I do think that is, the kind of game that we are heading in for in terms of a rock fight in Pittsburgh. So I'm not necessarily concerned about Pittsburgh's offense running away with the game by any means, but I do think that the concern is that they are not turning over the ball over, and the Chargers have to win the turnover battle if they're going to win this game, like they were able to be beat Carolina being a little bit sloppy with the football. This is a game where you have to absolutely 100% take care of the football, or a team as well disciplined as Pittsburgh will obviously make you pay. What level of panic should fans have for this game? You're Chargers fans, and we're all Chargers fans, so you should be panicked to the max. Interesting question. I guess I don't have a whole lot of panic for this game. I kind of am whatever happens, happens. I think I would feel differently. Like I said, if they were 1-1, if they were 0-2 going into this game and they absolutely needed a win. But I think the fact that the Chargers took care of business in the first 2 weeks has at least alleviated my stress levels to the point where, hey, if you drop one with a relatively limited Herbert, you're still playing for first place in the AFC West next week in what is going to be, a big game on CBS in that 4:00 window. So you still have a chance to kind of make a statement there, even if you lose this game based on how they started. So even if everything doesn't, go optimally for the Chargers in this game, as long as it is a competitive effort, I feel kind of okay going into tomorrow, regardless of what happens. I know that's not going to be a popular answer, but I'm not thinking that this is necessarily a must-win game that they absolutely have to have, and they'll have their opportunities, with an early bye week too to get Herbert healthy, and then potentially roll into Denver as well. Oh, yeah. Apparently Fields has fumbled and recovered a bunch of times. If you fumble and recover, then, it's not a turnover ultimately. So as long as you can hop on that thing. But that is the thing where Bosa and Mac, like I said, are going to have to be the initiators of creating a lot of turnovers, particularly in this game. Arturo Perez, who do you think is more of a threat to the Chargers D, Minshew that we saw in week 1 or Justin Fields? I'll say Fields only because I think Fields brings the run game component that Minshew's not really capable of at this age. Prime like Minshew, that those first years in Jacksonville was like pretty athletic, Washington State as well. But I do think Fields being able to make defenses pay for kind of making stupid decisions. Not that I expect the Chargers to do that, but we've seen times in certain years where it's like, 3rd and 5. Here come, the Chiefs, for example, and Mahomes is able to pick up a first down with his legs, right? In the same idea, Fields, if you are not, toned into the quarterback well, if you do not have a, proper QB spy on him, he's someone that can make you play for some lackadaisical coverage at the line as well. Do you think special teams will be the deciding factor in who wins? Dicker versus, I assume Boswell was kicking for the Steelers, or Darius Davis special return TD. I hope to see a little bit more from Darius Davis, I guess, if we're talking about special teams. I do not think the first 2 weeks have been particularly kind to him on tape, particularly the week 1 game against the Raiders was a little, if you watch the All-22 for that, he, would have had a touchdown if he didn't have some poor vision on one of those kicks. And then there was a punt. I think there was a kick he shouldn't have returned that he ended up doing, or it was a punt. I don't totally remember. But haven't really seen, at least in the special teams aspect, Darius Davis perform to the level that we've been, expecting from him and then we saw from him last year. So he could definitely turn the game with a big special teams type return in this game to give them field position. And I think the Chargers offense, especially if Herbert doesn't play or if Heineke's, playing, whatever the situation is probably going to need the special teams field position help. All right, let's keep going into the new comments. This comes from @fitness. What kind of punter are the Chargers looking for? So this is interesting. I don't know. We didn't really talk about this a ton, but the Chargers did work out a punter this week in Michael Pilardi, who is from the Charlotte area, former Commanders punter, I believe, when he was last in the league in 2022. J.K. Scott is 21st in punt yards this season. He is 25th, I think, in the league in net yards in terms of the amount of punts that are being returned. I don't know if this is, it's not injury related because J.K. Scott has not appeared on any injury reports. I do not think replacing J.K. Scott is imminent by any means. But the fact that they worked out a punter caught my attention. I don't know exactly what that was for. And I don't, again, like I said, I don't think replacing J.K. Scott is happening anytime soon. Per PFF, he's still second in hang time, and supposedly is essentially numbers-wise kind of the same as you would expect for J.K. Scott, but it depends. Are they looking for a punter who can drill the ball deep, or are they looking for kind of a hang time punter? Because not many of J.K. Scott's punts, even though when they have returned, they've been kind of bad, not many of them get returned. So that is kind of, philosophically, if you want to say what the Chargers are looking for in a punter, I don't know with the Jim Harbaugh staff. And Ryan Ficken had a lot of trust, in particular, with J.K. Scott last year. So I don't know if that's changed or if the new front office wants something different. But it was interesting that they worked out a punter with J.K. Scott, presumably not punt. Let's see. How many points can the Chargers score with Heineke or Stick? Like on the higher end, 17. On the lower end, a lot less than that. But I'd say you hope the defense obviously contributes in that regard. Do the Steelers have an advantage because of Tomlin's experience playing the Ravens? This is actually something that Minter talked about earlier in the week, because a lot of the Chargers staffers formerly played for Baltimore. Obviously, Ortiz is from Baltimore. Minter was formerly DC in Baltimore as well. So there's actually a lot of Chargers Baltimore connections in their front office as well, with guys like Corey Krawitz that are very familiar with playing the Steelers as they were members of the Ravens as well. So I actually don't think that's an advantage for the Steelers. I kind of think the Chargers, this particular coaching staff and where their roots are, Greg Roman, obviously been in a big bunch of Ravens Steelers games. This coaching staff in particular has a lot of experience playing at Heinz Field and generating, in Roman's case, some good rushing attacks with Dobbins at that location as well. So I actually think the Chargers are pretty well suited to take on the Steelers. Gabriel Caldera, is Alohi still out? I believe, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't have access to the injury report right now, but I believe he practiced the whole week. So I think he's questionable maybe, but I think he should play. It sounds like he's doing a lot better than last week. Kevin Brown Jr., looking ahead, do you believe we would need to shake up the depth chart for cornerback if Fields lights us up this week? No. I also don't think Fields is going to light them up. I think Christian Fulton and Asante and Ja have done pretty good, as well as, the safety room of Derwin and Elijah Molden and Lohi when he's played in week 1 as well. I think they've been fine. I don't think the Steelers are going to try to light them up, I guess is what I'm saying, particularly that they're not going to have a ton of time to throw the football based on what their offensive line looks like right now, based on what the Chargers, have been able to do with, some of the more underwhelming offensive lines in the league when they've rushed against them. So I think that they should be fine with the cornerback room in that regard. Let's see what else is going on. All right, so if you guys want to submit any more questions, feel the need to, and let's see what we can get going here. Excited for the game. Like I said, if you want to submit a super chat, feel free to do that as well. Maybe we'll go another 10 to 15 minutes. And as well as this is my return to the Saturday Q&A. If you want to ask any questions that are specifically non-Chargers, non-football related, I will answer them in the last 5 minutes as a GAC tradition for those who are familiar with the show. Gabriel Caldera, are you taking the over or under on Chargers being +2 in the turnover battle against the Steelers? Over under +2. I'll take the under only because I think if you have either Herbert limited or Heineke, plus the Chargers offensive line, I would say if they win the turnover battle, I think it'll be by like +1 or it'll be kind of a 0-0 turnover battle. I don't think they get that many on the Steelers. But again, like people have said, Justin Fields has lost a couple fumbles. He's regained a lot of them. But this is a game in which I think particularly the Chargers defense, when we talk about creating turnovers, is going to have to do that. And so, we'll see how exactly that's going to go on Sunday. Claudio Honorado, no matter what happens, I would never second guess Jim Harbaugh. So wetting your pants about stick playing possibly doesn't serve any purpose. Okay, but I've seen Heinicke play in good NFL games. I have seen Heinicke play important NFL football, whether it's in the playoffs or a full season's worth of starts, in which he was, at least an average to above average starter. Again, Stick has never played in an important NFL game before, and this front office and this coaching staff specifically went to the trade market after they watched this preseason. So, and they started Elijah Molden last week after he had been there like 10 days. So this idea that, Heinicke is so far off and he can't learn the playbook, Harbaugh, pretty much confirmed that wasn't true yesterday. If you're just going off of who's the best quarterback, who gives you the best chance to win, who gives you the best chance to hold on to the football, you absolutely have to go with Taylor Heinicke. I'm not going to be happy, honestly, if they were to go with Easton Stick, like I had said. NSN. Chargers don't have anyone in top 50 receiving yards individual. Is this a concern, you think? I mean, I think we've talked about the Chargers receiver room, going into the season, obviously without Keenan, without Mike, and this being the first season of seeing what that looks like. I'm not concerned that they don't have anyone yardage wise that's in there because they've also run the ball like 40 times in their first 2 games. So in that sense, there hasn't been a ton of opportunity for receivers to create a bunch of yards that they haven't picked up. Right. Obviously, I think the development that you've seen from QJ in these first 2 games is good. I'm not saying this is going to lead to a star turn by any means, but, looked very good in the Panthers game. Not an easy route that he beat JC Horn on and has been good at some of the smaller stuff that's given him some yak opportunities as well, particularly in week 1 when he was running some pitches and some shallows. Right. I think what I'm most concerned about the receiver room is when they play, really good secondaries, and they're going to look at that in week 4, particularly against the Chiefs, and this Steelers secondary is nothing to sneeze at either. It's who's able to create separation consistently. And they're waiting on DJ Chark, who's eligible to return in week 6. And, we'll see kind of where the receiver room goes from there. But I just think it is very valuable in the NFL, in particular, to have a guy who is capable of picking up really difficult, 3rd down, 4th down situations. And right now, I don't think they necessarily have that on their team. But again, QJ can develop throughout the season. I really expected more from Josh Palmer is kind of my answer here, because he has been a guy that's been able to go for 700, 800 yards, particularly when Keenan Allen or Mike Williams have missed some time. But he's dealing with a lot of stuff from the knee that has not gotten healthy since last year, in addition to now an arm injury that he's been dealing with. So that is kind of where I think that we are at. So yeah, I think you hope DJ Chark is able to come back and kind of shakes things up for this receiver room, but also with the style of football that they're playing, I don't think you necessarily, need to rely on your receiver room right now. They are having a ton of success in the run game. How sustainable is that? We'll see, right? And when J.K. Dobbins comes a little bit down from that 9.9 yards per carry, there will be more pressure on Greg Roman's passing concepts and for the receivers to step up when they aren't getting this level of rushing production. Could certainly see that this Sunday. We're against the Chiefs. And so that's where I think we're at with the receiver room. And obviously, if the Chargers are in a good enough place record-wise by the time the trade deadline comes, do they look at the market to look at guys that they could go get? And that's, sort of where we're at. As Eddie Dale Jr. says, needs Palmer to step up big time. I think so as well. I don't know if this is going to be the game for him to do that, particularly with how limited Herbert is. But as the season goes on, I really do think they need Palmer to establish himself as the receiver he kind of was back in 2022 in particular, and even last year prior to the knee injury. Because, not that Palmer is this dominant wide receiver one, but, he's shown that in those spots he can step up in the past, but it's the injury that has really troubled him to this point. So hope that we see a better performance from Palmer in which he's able to get it going. Let's see, what other comments do we have? Jacob Cantina, if Heineke was as good as you think then he wouldn't be a third string QB right now. Here's the thing with that. Easton Stick has never played in a meaningful NFL game before, and Heineke has, and I will leave it at that. How do you think Greg Roman gives the interior offensive line help? Can the tight ends help in the middle? So, I think you're going to see a lot of Disley playing in those positions, like, as far as tight end blocking is concerned. Hayden Hurst has been a little bit interesting as a blocker, not his best so far, but Disley is where we're kind of at, I think, as far as generating some help for the interior offensive line. And obviously they're going to do things like chip. I think they'll help their interior a little bit. Not just with, their tackles on the outside, but I don't think that they're going to, I don't think that they're going to, leave some of their guards in challenging positions. And for what it's worth, from a coaching standpoint, they did do better against stunts versus the Raiders in the second half. I don't have full confidence that it's going to be, dominant against the Steelers. But if the Steelers do decide to attack the Chargers with some stunts, I do think that they will deal with it better than they dealt with it in the first half of week one when they kind of adjusted at halftime as well. So, yeah. Let's see. Gabriel Caldera, I know it's not likely, but the Chargers are able to win us this game. Are they in discussion for top 3 offensive lines? Top 3. I'm trying to think of just in my head who are the best offensive lines in the league. I would say my bet is to kind of say no. I don't think they're in discussion for top 3, but I think they could be top 10. What you're really looking at is you have Alt and Slater, who are really good. I don't personally have any questions about Alt at this point. I trust his ability to move. I trust his ability to take guys one-on-one. I trust his ability to kind of be left alone, even without help at some points in some of these high-profile matchups. So I really think when you're trying to separate who are the best offensive lines in the league, it does come down to the Chargers' interior. And I just think right now the numbers on Bradley Bozeman have not been great to this point. A little bit of a better week last week, rough week 1 against the Raiders. And then Pipkins and Zion, to me, if you're talking about the difference between being a top 15 offensive line versus being a top 3, it's about the leap that those guys are going to take or not take throughout the year. And so that's where I really think they stand as far as, can they, as LD Bruin says, the Lions, Eagles, and Chiefs and teams like that have consistently really good interior offensive line pieces. I think the Chargers are unproven in that regard. But this season, I would say particularly watching that interior in all 22 makes me a little sad that Corey Linsley's not here. And obviously he had the heart problem and that issue. But I think that would really be pushing for a top 5 offensive line if they still had Corey Linsley playing at the all Pro Bowl level that he was playing at prior to last season. So I think that would have been some really good stuff. But right now, I just think Bozeman has kind of some issues, and there's some stuff to work on in the interior offensive line in general. So I can't put them top 3. I think it's very reasonable that by the end of the year they can be, top 10 offensive line. I don't put that past them in terms of the run game that Greg Roman is developing. So, certainly could get there. But let's see. Can this be a good lad game because Cam Sutton's probably out? Yeah, I mean, the Steelers secondary isn't in the best spot. But again, this is also like how much time are the Chargers, really going to have to throw? If the Chargers get a lot of time to throw, I certainly think, they can do some quick stuff with Ladd. Certainly, I wouldn't be against some, like Ladd screens or just some shallows or hitches, even some easy stuff that QJ was kind of running in week 1. But for like Ladd from the slot, I think wouldn't be like a terrible idea. But I think this is going to be a difficult time where they're not going to have a bunch of, chances to, bomb the ball downfield. So it's just going to be a matter of if McConkey is kind of able to have a performance like he did in week 1, which I think he can. But I also just don't know how much time Herbert's going to have back there. I don't know how much, mobility, ability to extend plays, and, just overall poise there is going to be in, the game plan tomorrow versus they could run the ball 50 times and pass 10, like with where they are from a quarterback situation. So I think this will be a good receiver game for Ladd. I don't know how many opportunities he's legitimately going to get, is kind of what I'll say on that. All right, let's see if we got any other questions. 2023, Chargers allowed 36 points. The Dolphins' first game, 2024, Chargers have allowed 13. How many games until they give up the additional 23 points from last year? Wow, this is a good question. I'll give it till next week. I think they are able to keep the Steelers under 23 points. I do not think they'll have quite the same success that they've had against Minshew and Bryce Young and Fields against Patrick Mahomes. But I do think the defense in general, going back to that point, has been really awesome to watch. And when you watch it back on tape, I think you just see a certain confidence that the CB room is playing with, the linebacker room is playing with, in particular, the defensive line right now, right? And I think Joey Bosa even talked about this at his press conference, just knowing that your defensive line, your linebackers are going to be in the right positions at the right time, I think is really helpful for them. So honestly, been a great year, I think, for the defense on tape so far. There's going to be issues where I think they're not, they're going to be more tested throughout the year, right? Particularly when they go against better teams. But for now, I think this defense has been issuing the, very cover 2 heavy, Minter scheme, that, they've been doing that read and react defense thing very well. Kevin Kernick asks Alex, are you getting Staley vibes watching the Fangio defense and the Eagles? How cooked is Sirianni? I thought he should have been fired last year. So that's all I'll say on that. Very fun team to watch, the Philadelphia Eagles, as always. All right, let's see what kind of questions we got going on. I'll go maybe for another 10 minutes, and then we'll wrap up the show with some late thoughts to go into the game tomorrow. Yeah. Let's see what else we got in here. And again, we are in the last 5 to 10 minutes. So if you have any specifically non-Chargers related questions, if you want to know how many babies or tanks it would take to defeat the other, we do leave, or what shows I'm watching, we do leave time to discuss some non-Chargers topics at the end of these Q&As. So we also have that. Now that Alan isn't in the hot seat, who is Alan? Wait, who are we talking about? Who's? Oh, head coach most likely to be fired first. Oh, Dennis Allen from the Saints. Sorry. Who's coach most likely to be fired first? It pains me to say this. I actually think that the head coach most likely to be fired first is potentially Doug Peterson. If you've looked at the Jaguars' schedule, I think there is like a very legitimate chance that they could be like 0-4. Let me look up exactly what the Jaguars' schedule is. But because they've dropped these first two games that were kind of winnable, they have Buffalo, and then they have Houston back-to-back, which is a potential 0-4 scenario for them. I do think Shad Khan tends to be pretty patient with his coaches, and Peterson's obviously had a lot of success there before. But I don't think it's impossible he's the first coach fired. And I've started to really think that the Jags offense also just looks really bad in a way that I don't even think it's like a Trevor Lawrence issue specifically. You know, when he was injured towards the end of last year, just their offense is just schemed so bad. Like they don't have spacing in their offense, despite how much money they've spent, you know, on receiver in the past and paying Evan Ingram and stuff like that. It hasn't worked out for the Jags. So dark horse, I kind of say him. You know, there are obvious ones. If the Giants start to slip, it could be Brian Daboll. That is another possibility. So I would say Daboll, or I would say Doug Peterson, that's how quickly the NFL moves. That is, you know, how quickly the NFL moves. Both of those guys back in, 2022, were Coach of the Year finalists. And, you know, as the Giants and Jaguars have, you know, failed to progress for different reasons in their respective situations, they now are on the hot seat, which is kind of crazy to think about, in my opinion. If we end the year with pick 19, what are you getting? I am not I'm not into the draft yet. I don't know any of the players. I just know Will Johnson. But the Chargers aren't going to be high enough to draft Will Johnson. It was the quarterback out of Michigan. He's fun to watch. Mason Graham is fun to watch. Travis Hunter's fun to watch. I know some of the quarterbacks, Ewers, Beck, but I'm not that well-versed on the draft yet in terms of watching tape. At some point I will be, but we'll get to that when we cross that bridge next year. Which position, this comes from LD Bruin, could be a target for a trade midseason? Any tight ends on a bad team? I don't know about tight ends on a bad team. There's a couple interesting ones for them. Amari Cooper is one that I think could make sense. I don't think the Browns ultimately sell, though. So then, like, because the Browns still have, like, the Giants and the Commanders and a couple easy games on their schedule in addition to their AFC North game. So I don't know if they're going to be bad enough to, like, tank and start selling pieces, at least at this point. You know, people also always say trade for offensive line, but, like, no one's going to trade offensive linemen only because, you know, this is like the least offensive line talent depth that we've had in the league. So teams aren't going to willingly give that up. But I think you're looking at probably a tight end or a wide receiver. I haven't started, like, diving into, you know, potentials based on, like, the contracts and stuff. People could shout out names in the chat and I could say yes or no. But I think really, I would say wide receiver is the one position that, like, if the Chargers roll into the deadline and they're like, I don't know, let's say 5-3 type team at the very least, and they want to make a move for one of those receivers who becomes available, then I think it's possible. From Cadillac, draft my cousin Colston Loveland. Everyone has talked about Loveland, obviously. But we'll see if they end up drafting another Michigan guy. And it would be very Jim Harbaugh to draft a tight end and offensive tackle in back-to-back years in the first round of the draft. Jared Holeby, heard the Steelers are down 3 offensive line starters. How many sacks did we get? I was actually a little bit surprised watching the tape against the Panthers. Just some of the things that offensive line has been able to do. This is one of the biggest lies that Bryce Young truthers have constructed around Bryce Young is that the offensive line is so bad for the Panthers. The offensive line was great for the Panthers on Sunday. And like they kind of shut down the Chargers low key. I think Chargers got 7 pressures total. And here's a stat for you. 3 sacks were 3 pressures of those 7 that the Chargers got were credited to the Panthers tight ends, offensive line, and running backs, which means that 4 pressures that were on Bryce Young was responsible for, credited by PFF. So the Panthers offensive line honestly played pretty awesome against this defensive line. I'm not concerned that this defensive line can, certainly do better against the Steelers. But also, it's going to come down to what the game plan is, right? If the Steelers go for a lot of dump offs, short screens, things of that nature, then, the sacks won't be there. But I think the biggest thing is just, can they force the Steelers into situations where they have to throw deep, particularly on 2nd down and 3rd down, and don't have as many times to do the screens and the dink and dunk stuff? Then you can get more sacks, obviously. I'll say they get, I'll go 3 sacks tomorrow on Justin Fields, but we'll see. I do think the bigger thing to watch in this game, particularly with their offensive line as, inexperienced and as troubled as it is right now, is are they able to get some penalties on the Steelers, particularly false starts and holdings and things of that nature? That to me may be more valuable than pressure and, just to drive the Steelers back down a couple yards. So we'll see. Would the Finns get rid of Tyreek if their season's lost? Nope. I think, didn't they just sign an extension with him? I thought they signed some type of deal to keep him there. Yeah, so he's not leaving anytime soon. Would Rutgers accept a Pac-12 invite? No, we're ready to dominate the best Big Ten conference there is. But no, they're going to hang around in the Big Ten for as long as they can until they're kicked out. That's kind of the Rutgers situation right now. This comes from Fitness. I've talked about Tony Romo on my Twitter. Anytime Tony Romo is commentating a game, I will just say straight out that I don't like him. And I'll get a lot of replies from Chargers fans that like, oh yeah, he he gobbles Mahomes. He's always praising Mahomes. And I don't hate him for any of those reasons. He just he was so good at first. People don't understand how good Tony Romo is. And was to, begin stuff where he would, the whole thing was he was a Jedi. He was he was predicting plays before they happened. Right. And really breaking that down really well on television when he started. And he stopped caring. And this is going to be my Tony Romo rant, but I remember watching the Bills Bengals game. Maybe it was a couple of years ago in the playoffs. And he was just going into all these quarterback narratives about who's going to tough it out between Joe Burrow and Josh Allen, and not talking about the actual game that was being played on the field. And that really annoyed me. The stuff in the Super Bowl where, Mecole Hardman catches the game-winning touchdown and he steps all over Jim Nance's game-winning touchdown call. I'm just what are you doing? So that's really driven my hate for Romo. I used to have Collinsworth solo one on the NFL commentators that I hate doing live games, but Romo has been challenging him recently. And certainly Romo's probably going to be calling the Chargers-Chiefs game next week. So 3 of the first 4 Chargers games being Tony Romo games. It has been a challenge. I will say that. LDE Bruin. I miss Greg Olsen. I will say this is a great point as well. I do miss Olsen and everything he was doing. Brady, I only watched him to some extent week 1, rewatching the Cowboys-Browns game. But he was a little rough on some of the stuff I've seen from the Fox pregame shows even. So, but that'll take time, I think, for Brady to be good. NSN, who are the good commentators? That's a good question. I feel the NFL is definitely the sport. Kevin Harlan is awesome. I love Kevin Hart. He's not a commentator, but as a play-by-play guy, he's great. Greg Olson as a color commentator is good. I like Troy Aikman. I do like Buck and Aikman is probably Buck and Aikman is probably the least bad broadcast now, which I'm not saying it's good, but it is like the most like broadcast I hate least watching, I guess. So yeah, but it's been rough times in the NFL. I think yeah, and I echo Eddie's point here that they do need to call up Gus Johnson. He's been good. So I would say Kevin Harlan is awesome. There's this great video on YouTube where Harlan has done like play-by-plays of like all the crazy stuff that he's commentated and done play-by-play for. So anytime the Chargers have him, I think that is a absolutely awesome game. So yeah. Tyler chirping in with Tony Romo right now or Easton Stick for backup quarterback. I would rather see Tony Romo play on the field for the Chargers on Sunday than be in the booth calling the game. I'll say that much. So, yeah. Also, like, okay, I don't mean to get too much into the Tony Romo thing, but Tony Romo straight up will start some broadcasts and like sound like he's either drank or like smoked a bunch of heaters like prior to a broadcast. Like it is rough starting a broadcast with him. I'll get off of Romo. Marcus Reichert, who do you think will be a factor in the passing game for the Chargers? I think this is actually maybe a pretty big Will Dissly game in regards to the passing game. So from week 1 to week 2, Dissly gained in snaps, even in passing sets. And I think Hurst dropped a little bit, like 6 or 7% in terms of his usage. Obviously, that can just be kind of based on opponent and game to game. But I think Dissly's actually going to be pretty involved in this game, particularly if they just kind of need like a safety blanket guy for the quarterback. Hurst obviously, fits into that as well. But yeah, I think Ladd can get involved. Steelers have had their struggles at slot corner. So I'll go with Ladd and particularly Dissly. And then I think this is a week where if you're not maybe having some of the same success with Dobbins in regards to the run game that you have with the first 2 weeks, I wouldn't mind doing some end arounds and some stuff to QJ and Darius Davis when they're well planned as well. Obviously, you can't do them super often, but if you can sneak a first down here and there, that's not the passing game, but that can be valuable too. So I think Dissly is a sneaky guy who could get involved in the passing game this week. Did you watch the Raiders broadcast? Romo was hyping Pierce up about his team, listens to him, and has so much control of it. He has such a bright future. Yeah, I'm sure he probably was very complimentary. I actually, for what it's worth, I do think what am I talking about? Pierce, the Raiders coach, has been okay outside of deciding to punt that 4th and 1 against the Chargers. I don't know what he was doing there. But thanks, because he got the Chargers a win. But LD Bruin, will Vidal be active? I do not think Vidal will be active tomorrow. We are on Kamani Vidal watch, obviously, with the performance of Gus Edwards, though. I think he will not be active unless one of Dobbins or Edwards is injured going into a game. We have not seen them on the injury report this year. But I think that's going to be the biggest like Vidal indicator of if he plays this year will be that. All right. Let's see what else we get. Yeah, and as Fitness points out, Hassan Haskins is Harbaugh's boy too. And Hassan Haskins, actually, to his credit, has been very good from a special teams perspective. So he's, I think, played over like 15, 16 special team snaps in both of these games. So, he's going to be a big part of what they do throughout the year from a special teams standpoint. So we'll see. All right. Well, that'll do it for us. I am going to lock in and watch in some Rutgers football today, where they'll run the ball 40 times, and then I'll watch some Chargers football tomorrow, where they'll run the ball 50 times as well. Before I get off, ET44A, Alex, give us a final game prediction. If Herbert starts, I think they win 14-13. If Herbert doesn't start, I think they lose like 17-9 or something along those lines. I do think it'll be tough sledding either way. But gonna lock into some college football today, pro football tomorrow, and I will see you guys on bolt breakdowns on Monday. Join me there. It is I know it doesn't get quite as many views as the streams that Steven or Tyler do, but it is the post-game show that I do every Monday on the channel. So after the Chargers game, win, loss, or draw, we will be there to break down what happened for about 25-30 minutes, and I will upload that video to this channel. So as always, bolt up, beat the Steelers, fuck Pittsburgh, and see you guys next time.